So I'm Rob Gamel, and I'm so excited to welcome you today to our Small Business Acceleration training program and workshop. Yes, we'll be doing some work together. Whether you're running a business or working in one, you're responsible for results, right? And if you want to think differently to get amazing results, you're in the right place, because I'm going to be sharing today everything I know and in the subsequent sessions. So let's dive right in here. First, I'd like to give you a bit of background on your host. My journey has been all about can-do. I started as a fine artist, and that was my career choice until I was a junior in college, when some professors intervened and signed me up for architecture school. They observed that these paintings and sculptures I was making of dysfunctional furniture, I became more engaged in them as they were more and more functionally demanding. So fast forward about 2.5 years, and I landed at Apple Computer as an industrial designer. The thing was, at the time, they were looking for somebody with 5 years of experience doing injection molding, people who knew about electronics, had been in the consumer or the high-tech electronics industry, and were living and working in Silicon Valley. Well, I had 1.5 years of experience. I'd read a couple articles about injection molding, and I was living in Ohio. For some reason, I decided that was good enough. So I packed up the car, moved to California, and bugged the hell out of Apple until they hired me. So for the first 4 years, I worked as an industrial designer, designing keyboards, computer products, related peripherals. If you see on this slide at the bottom, you might notice there's an annual report. That's me wearing a white jacket in this annual report. So I migrated then from a designer to a manager, and I ended up managing a team of folks in product development. And then after the 4th year, I wanted to try something different, and some friends in the marketing division brought me there to become a creative director and do everything that was 3-dimensional in marketing that was not a product. So that included trade show booths, signage, packaging, all of the other things that marketing does. And I ended up managing a team that approached 50 people. So after my Apple stint, I felt very entrepreneurial and wanted to give my own shot at doing something. I co-founded a catalog business called The Home Book. And our first catalog out the gate just happened to win first Best New Catalog of the Year from the American Catalog Age Association and Direct Marketing Association. So that was a wonderful start. Unfortunately, there was a recession 2 years later. We ended up selling it, and I rejoined a few former colleagues from Apple who had just started a consulting firm whose biggest client was Apple. So I ended up doing an awful lot more work for Apple. So I became a consultant, and then more recently, in the last 5 years, I've been doing an awful lot of coaching, not paid. So I've decided to become a paid coach and combine that with some of the consulting work. Most recently, we've been doing an awful lot of work in the California wine country, working with lifestyle, hospitality, and related businesses. And of course, I still have some high-tech clients. For about 10 years, I was the non-official creative director for the Sonoma Valley Visitor Bureau, and did an awful lot of work for the Chamber, Vintners and Growers Alliance, and an awful lot of other smaller businesses in the North Bay area. So enough about me. Let's dive into what we intend to cover in the course. So in the first 2 weeks, we're going to zero in on what you do best, who values it, and how to laser focus on it so we can put it to work and start getting some great results for you immediately. In weeks 3 to 4, we'll focus on how to improve or add new services or products or enhance ones that you're already delivering, but you know there's opportunity for dramatic improvement. We'll also look at this as a model for other changes that can be made in your business, because hopefully it'll be extendable. And then in weeks 5 and 6, we'll dive in with hands-on creation of marketing materials that you'll be ready to launch at the end of the 6th week, so that you can begin this new chapter for your business. So let me see here. I didn't keep up on the clicks, so apologies for that. So let's review what we're going to cover today. We'll be providing background on how Apple thinks. This is intended to loosen your minds for thinking about your own situation and how some of those lessons can already start playing a role in what you're doing. Specifically, we'll cover why we're here, the ultimate goal, and I share this same goal with all of you, and then the strategy that's driven by that singular goal. Then we'll do a deep dive into some of the Apple background so that you have some context and so you have a better understanding of how they arrived at the way they operate. And this will set the stage for delving into some macro lessons that Apple learned the hard way over the years and that I've learned working with nearly 150 small and large clients. Then we'll dive into something that I call the quiet business revolution. It's something that hasn't been in the press much, but it's an essential part of what Apple does, although I've never seen or heard anybody at Apple laying it out the way you'll see it presented today. And then I'll give you an overview of what I call the pyramid value exercise. This will be your first task in the course, where we'll help you define what's most valuable and relevant for your target customers and clients. And then we'll finish with a little bit of inspiration to get you launched. Okay, so let's dive right into the deep end. So why are you here? Well, what does the evidence tell you? Look around. Listen, think about your current situation, your customers and clients, what you deliver, what you're really good at doing, and what you're not so good at doing. Also, those things that they appreciate most and that they find most valuable. So it's after you get a really good understanding of your current situation and where the value is generated that you'll be in a position to be able to more effectively navigate and plan for the transition that you want. So I think we all share the same goal here. We are in one place right now, and we want to move to another place that's better. It's on a higher level, however you're defining that, and it's fine for you to define that the way you want to. And we know that there's going to be some work involved in getting there. But the end goal, of course, is some form of transformation. So we want to focus in on right now your current situation, being realistic about accepting it, strengths, weaknesses, warts, etc., so that we're prepared to take some bold steps. So let's get to a much better place. So first, let's give some thought to what's our motivation. It's pleasure versus pain, right? This is true for work as well as after work, right? Well, here's the thing. It's hard to truly embrace the enjoyment part, the pleasure part, unless you've got a really good handle on understanding the pain part so that that can be managed and so that you can overcome that. So the methodology we're going to follow here is there's going to be some embracing some pain and self-learning so that we can set ourselves up to more effectively envision the dream and how we might achieve that. Because the ultimate is to get out of this place that we're in right now. And you know, it might not be that bad of a place. You might be on a business plateau or so that's very comfortable, but for whatever reason, you'd like to move it to a higher level, a higher plateau or plane, but hopefully it's several rungs up the ladder, right? And in some of your cases, you actually might feel like you're in a rut. That's fine. I've been there. It's painful, and I've worked hard to get out of it. This, what we'll be going through will help you get out of a rut too, if that's your situation. Okay, so this thinking will drive what we'll be doing. And one thing I like to keep top of mind is that I like to balance what I'm doing rationally and business-wise with my emotional side also. I found that emotion married with a plan drives the passion to take action. And this was certainly true when I was at Apple, and this is still true for Apple today. This applies to you, but also to your clients and customers. The time you spend thinking about this will help you get a better understanding of what's going on in their heads and what their needs are too. And we'll tap into that later in the course. So I learned at Apple that this thinking works, but only if we've been brutally honest with ourselves at the beginning. So we really want to zero in on our current situation. This will lead us to a place where we've got new perspectives, new views of our business and our situation, as well as the opportunities that are in front of us. And it'll help us put together a plan and then execute it. The net result of this should be new energy and a new level of confidence for you too. So let's take a look at where some of this comes from. In the case of Apple, their goal has always been to develop dramatically improved products or services, ones that become truly loved so their customers will happily part with their money. And I say happily. An awful lot of Apple customers spend way more money than they should be able to afford on Apple products, software, services, and such. And they're smiling about it. It's an amazing phenomenon. So other businesses do this too, and there's no reason you can't achieve this yourselves. So this is our goal. This is my goal, okay? So let's spend some time understanding how Apple got to be so successful and so good at this. You know, let's ask ourselves some questions. Was it because they hired genius engineers? Was it due to some marketing voodoo that they tapped into? Was there perhaps a secret formula that somebody shared with them, or they just happened to figure out themselves? Or was it all on Steve Jobs springing forth from his mind? Well, actually, it can be broken down to three simple things. And from my perspective, having studied Apple and worked there for multiple decades, it's three things that an awful lot of people might not automatically identify. The first was that Apple identified a very promising niche and developed a product around it. The Apple I was a niche product for a hyper niche customer, but some of the other people looking at it, in particular Steve Jobs, envisioned a day where that hyper niche product could be available and accessible for much broader audiences, if not the entire population of the planet. That's how big he was thinking, even at that young age when he founded Apple. Here's the thing about the first product, and here's the thing to keep in mind as we're focusing on some of our products and services that we deliver. Apple's first product couldn't really do anything. You needed an engineering degree and an awful lot of additional electronics and equipment to make it work. And oh, by the way, once you got it to work and you turned it on, there was no software for it. So then you actually had to write some code if you wanted to do anything with it. There was a very, very small audience of potential customers for this product. Nevertheless, that's how Apple started. The other thing that helped Apple stand apart was a deep desire to do things not just better, but the best at whatever it was. So here you see Steve Wozniak with the long hair and the glasses standing to the left of Steve Jobs when he was very young. So this was taken right after he got one of his very rare haircuts. Usually back in the day, he had shoulder-length hair. So the one thing that united both Steves was they were obsessed. Steve Wozniak was obsessed by the fun of inventing new products and playing games, telling jokes. For him, every day was a bowl of cherries. He was happy as a clam just working away at his job at HP. Steve Jobs, he was obsessive about doing something that made a ding in the universe. And he saw the Apple opportunity as his ticket to get there and do something like that. So the third ingredient was the collection of great mentors, thought leaders who provided incredible wisdom to the Steves and the rest of the folks that were recruited in the early days of Apple. I'm going to name a few of them. There were more than 3 mentors, but the 3 that I knew and dealt with the most, and I think had enormous impact, were Regis McKenna. He was a PR guy that Steve went to when he first had the idea to get some press. Now, Regis knew all of the founders and VCs in Silicon Valley. So Regis introduced Steve Jobs to a guy named Mike Markkula, who had recently retired after making $6 million from National Semiconductor. And at the age of 36, he decided he was done working. Well, Mike Markkula was the original angel investor, and he also helped the 2 Steves write their first business plan. At the end of that 2 weeks, the 2 Steves liked his thinking and liked his style of working so much that they begged him to join them as the 3rd founding partner of Apple, which he did with the agreement that he would not have to be the CEO. And then the 3rd person is a guy named Lee Clow. He was the chief creative officer for the ad agency Chiat Day that produced a lot of Apple's memorable advertising. Now, Steve didn't know Lee when they were first founding Apple because the ad agency actually was a division of Regis McKenna's PR firm. When he sold his ad agency to Chiat Day, he got Lee Clow as part of the deal, and Chiat Day got Apple as part of the deal in exchange too. So one of the most fundamental stakes that was planted in the early days of Apple was the Apple marketing philosophy. And Mike Markkula wrote this and distributed it to the original staff at Apple in January of 1977. But it was originally intended to help them think about marketing, but eventually it affected and infiltrated every corner of Apple. And just in case you can't read it, I'm going to read it out loud for you. The Apple marketing philosophy: empathy. We truly understand their needs better than any other company. This is referring, of course, to their customers and users. The second point, focus. In order to do a good job of those things we decide to do, we must eliminate all of the unimportant opportunities. And then third, impute. Boy, is this a word that only an engineer would love. Nevertheless, it is apt here once you understand what he meant by it. People do judge a book by its cover. We may have the best product, the highest quality, the most useful software, etc., etc. If we present them in a slipshod manner, they will be perceived as slipshod. If we present them in a creative, professional manner, We will impute the desired qualities. What he means here is they will become self-evident in that first impression that's made. And this is something that is still true for Apple today as it was then. They always like to lead with an incredibly strong and memorable first impression, and they like to finish with a very strong and memorable lasting impression. Okay, so let's go through a little bit of their history and evolution. So if Apple was about anything, it was about continuous improvement. Usually it was incremental, but often there were big breakthroughs. And I'm not talking about, like in the auto industry where they change the styling a little bit each year, they make a few modifications so that they can say, oh, this is the 2018 model. Now at Apple, they tried to make much more valuable and relevant improvements that were driven by the customer's known and unknown needs and dreams. So in 1976, when the first Apple I was introduced, as I mentioned, you had to buy all this other stuff to get it to work. And oh, by the way, it didn't even have a housing. So if you wanted it to have a housing, you had to build it yourself. Here's a representative one of the few hundred remaining examples of the Apple I. What was interesting was that the first big order they got was to a computer store in Los Altos. The computer store owner thought that Apple was going to deliver boards inside housings with the rest of the stuff. Boy, was he in for a surprise. But the Steves learned then that what they needed to do for the next product that they introduced was provide a complete solution. So the next year, 1977, they introduced the Apple II. Now what's pictured here is the Apple IIe, which I helped work on and improve when I joined. But the original Apple II had a built-in keyboard, power supply, the PC board. It had everything you needed to be able to start computing, except for a monitor and software. You still had to buy additional stuff. So Apple started producing software and cutting deals with other developers, but it was still a bit of a headache and a big hassle for an awful lot of their customers. Then in 1984, Apple delivered the first complete solution, the Macintosh. Once you took it out of the box, all you had to do was turn it on, and the screen lit up, welcomed you with a hello, and there was built-in software that you could immediately start using and doing some work or playing with. Apple also distributed it with some cassette tapes, so you could listen to some really wonderful music and a step-by-step tutorial that taught you about all the cool new features and capabilities it had, because this was the first accessible computer that had been introduced that used a mouse and had a graphical interface. So it was very paradigm shifting for an awful lot of people. And then Steve Jobs left in 1985 and was forced out of Apple because of poor performance with the Macintosh and creative, we'll just call them creative differences. So he left and started Next, and of course got involved with Pixar. When he went back to Apple, because Apple bought Next from him, he went back, and the first computers he developed were the iMac and what you see pictured here in 1999, the iBook. These are the first computers that were designed to be optimized for the use of the internet. And then he continued to make improvements and fundamental leaps with the introduction of the original iPhone in 2007. Likewise, Apple evolved its marketing. It was not a linear path. It tended to evolve in spurts. So Apple's first ad in 1996 was very much targeted at very technical people. It was all about features, bits and bytes. very few people would understand what they were writing about and the benefits of a lot of the features pictured in the ad that you see here at the far left. It's very interesting also to look at the logo. It's hard to tell, but I'll just tell you what you're looking at. There's a tree, an apple tree. Sitting under it is Isaac Newton pondering the apple that just dropped from the tree and hit him on the head. So Apple's first ads were typical of small businesses, especially in the technical realm. They were so convinced that all the cool features and functionality of their product represented the better mousetrap, that people would understand why they were important and the product would fly off the shelves. Well, they learned that wasn't the case. Fortunately, they had some wonderful mentors who worked with them. So that by the time 1984 came around, Apple's advertising had transformed immensely. They had gotten rid of all of the discussion of bits and bytes, and they removed all technical terms. But they were still in the business of educating people about the virtues of personal computing and why everybody could benefit from having a personal computer. So the advertising back then was very educationally oriented and focused, which is something you have to do if you're pioneering in a new category. You have to train and teach your audience about the value of what you're delivering. By 1997, when Steve returned to Apple, Apple had already done an excellent job of training and educating the worldwide audience about the virtues of personal computing. And so that work was done. Apple had a different problem. They'd been losing money for a few years, and they were desperate. Their products were considered very average at that point. Me Too. Competition had caught up, so it wasn't very particularly differentiated, even though it was still easier to use and faster to learn and more intuitive. There still wasn't enough of a competitive advantage to justify the higher prices they wanted to charge. So Steve's first act was to get together with Lee Clow and put together an ad campaign that wasn't about the products because there wasn't much news there. Instead, he advertised a call to action. They called it the Think Different campaign, and it was all about appreciating and celebrating these heroes who've changed the world that we live in. People like Bob Dylan and John Lennon and Isaac Newton and Alfred Einstein, Thomas Edison, Mahatma Gandhi, et cetera, et cetera. By the time we were in the mid-2000s, Apple's advertising had evolved yet further. Apple didn't need a reason to give people, to make people reconsider Apple as an alternative for choosing a high-tech product, because now they were truly innovating, not just with their products, but with the advertising and marketing that went around it. Here you can see one of the early iPod ads, which was a masterful integration of product advertising tied to the emotional benefit it delivers, and it was executed very iconically. So the first time you saw an iPod ad, you recognized it. It burned an impression in your mind. And over the course of the 4 or 5 years where Apple was doing iPod advertising, they only evolved the headline ever so slightly. Upon introduction, it was 1,000 songs in your pocket. By 2005, it had evolved to 10,000 songs in your pocket. So interesting to see how Apple's advertising evolved over the years. All right, so no one's perfect. Apple has been desperate many times in its life. I remember when I worked there, it seemed like every 18 months, the press was full of negative news about how Apple had finally tapped out and had run out of luck. So they made many mistakes along the way. Right before they went public in 1980, they introduced the Apple III. It was the world's heaviest computer. It was made out of magnesium and aluminum with lots of steel in there, and we called it inside the boat anchor or the doorstop. In the late 90s or late 80s, Apple introduced its first portable. This portable product weighed about 20 pounds, and so we internally called it the luggable. That was followed in the early 90s by the Apple Newton, Apple's first attempt to have a much more, a less expensive and a handier, more accessible product that could be kept in your pocket and used for so many uses beyond which a personal computer was available at the time. And then, of course, Steve was responsible for creating an amazingly powerful, beautifully designed computer at Next that had the world's friendliest, most intuitive graphic interface. But at $10,000, very few people could afford it, and he could barely afford to produce it and make a profit at that price, which led to Apple's purchase of Next and his motivation behind it. Not long after he returned and he did the iMacs, he also introduced what was called the Mac Cube or the iCube, pictured here. It was a beautiful product, and it was designed for desktop, and it was optimized for the use of the internet. The problem was he tried to make it so compact that it generated enormous amounts of heat that affected its performance. And if you were using it in a home office, like I did on occasions on a warm day, it would effectively warm up your whole office. And then, of course, Apple had some oddity products that were introduced over the years. One of them here you see is one of their first attempts at doing a digital camera. The weird thing about this was, I think they envisioned that it was like holding binoculars up to your eyes, but in practice, it felt more like holding a sandwich up to your face. It was just a very awkward experience. And then, of course, there was Apple's introduction to the world of mobile phones. They did a joint deal with Motorola in the mid-2000s, early to mid-2000s, that was finally introduced, and it was called the Rocker. And it was a cell phone that integrated some of the Macintosh-like interface so that you could do pull-down menus and some scrolling, that type of thing. Steve was so disappointed by it that he pulled together a team of people, and he said, we have to do something to recover from this embarrassment. And that team turned into what became the iPhone team and created that product. And then lastly, of course, just because Apple had figured all this out and delivered the brilliant iPhone didn't mean it was immune from making further failures. What you see in the lower right-hand corner was the first version of Apple Maps. It was a terrible product. They hadn't done enough homework and testing on it, and it delivered an awful lot of people to the wrong destinations. Me too. So I switched to Google Maps for the longest time until Apple had its act together. Okay, so that's a little bit of history on products and marketing, but let's also take a look at business to see what lessons might be here. So we're all in business to create value, right? So let's keep Apple's success in perspective. When you look at this chart, what you notice is that, geez, Apple grew pretty quickly after it was founded, but then after it went public, its stock price didn't rise much for over 20 years, closer to 25 years. And it wasn't until the 2000s that it really started doing its incredible and remarkable climb. So it's good to keep that in mind. But we're small business people, right? So we don't have stock in our businesses. We don't measure our success based on equity, that type of value. We measure it on sales and profits and what we put in the bank or what goes into our wallet. So let's take this down to our level and think more like small business people. So our value then is measured in different ways. So let's compare how Apple did and fared over the years since Steve was left the company in 1985. If you look at the green graph, we can see that Apple's sales grew from about $800 million. So in our cases, just remove a few zeros, okay? So it becomes more relevant to us. So they grew from $800 million to about $8 billion between 1985 and 1995. But here's the thing, when you look at the profitability, it was flat during that period. Here's why. Apple didn't innovate much after Steve left. They did a great job of marketing and growing market share and selling a hell of a lot of computers, but competitors were catching up every year and getting closer and closer. So Apple's competitive edge started dropping, and it couldn't get away with charging the high prices it had been charging that have been delivering those high profits. It got so bad that in 1996, Apple started losing money by the boatload. It lost over $1 billion that year, and the CEO left the company. They went through 2 more CEOs trying to stem the flow until they decided to buy Next from Steve and bring Steve Jobs on, initially just as a consultant and advisor. But he recommended that they get rid of the current CEO and that he, take a shot at helping Apple just on an interim basis. So, but even with Steve's brilliant thinking and his incredible focus and obsession on doing things well, doing them right, it was still years before he was able to correct the path for Apple and put them on a growth path for both sales and profitability. It takes time to make transformation happen. Good thing for us to keep in mind as we delve into some of the work we're going to be doing. By the way, I want to point out here that it wasn't until Apple introduced and started really maximizing what was going on with the iTunes store and Apple stores that Apple really transformed their business model and created this ecosystem that became so profitable. No longer did they have to deal with middlemen, so they got to keep the money that the middlemen used to charge for themselves. And it was due to some of the innovative thinking they did that enabled that. Okay, so let's revisit this question I asked originally. Why are we here? Well, I think the answer is to think differently, right? To get better results. So, so let's go through what we want to cover today. So I distributed to everybody the ebook that I put together to go along with this course. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at it. If you haven't, I encourage you to do so. I think you might get some inspiration out of it. So this is the way people would do things at Apple. So the book was laid out, to tell a story, but we're going to reverse the order of what we're going to be addressing for the sake of the course. We're going to start at the end. So what we want to deliver ultimately to our customers and clients is a remarkable experience. So we want to stage experiences, and we want to keep in mind that we want to stage these in such a way that customers want to repeat them. We want to make them remarkable enough that they want to share that with other people. The simplest thing to do to start with a remarkable experience or end up there is to start with the cure, to pick a valuable service or product that currently really sucks right now, or we know that could be an awful lot better. Okay? So the next thing that we'll be addressing will be getting constant feedback. So one thing that Apple learned, and this was kind of a surprise to them in spite of their earlier efforts, but once they had their own stores and they had the iTunes store, they had this incredibly rich feed in real time of what was going on with all of their customers, their clients, and all of their users. So they could look at any time of day or night at dashboards and see what was going on, what was working, what wasn't. So the smartest retailers I know love to spend time in their stores because they get that kind of visceral, real world feedback. My wife runs a retail store and she loves to be in there every week for the same reason too. That way you get amazing insights into who really craves your product and why, and where the value is in that, and where there are opportunities to perfect that or take advantage of it going forward. The other thing it helps you do is get a better handle on the empathy. What are the pain points that they have? What's going to really make what you do more remarkable and relevant to them, as well as what can be delivered consistently day in, day out. Okay? All right, now I want to talk about something that I learned after I left Apple. But it fits so perfectly, I couldn't believe we hadn't talked about this when I was there. So our world is continually changing, often invisibly. Over the past 100 years, there's been quite an evolution of what's been going on in commerce with industrialization, the industrial age, the information age, the service age, et cetera, et cetera. But until the late 90s, I hadn't seen anybody break it down and explain it in a way that really resonated with me and a lot of the creative people and small businesses that I worked with. But in 1999, two guys, a guy named Joseph Pine and Gilmore, wrote a book titled The Experience Economy. And what they laid out in this book was the evolution of commerce. And it started, just looking at two dimensions, but these dimensions just happen to perfectly fit the way Apple thought about the world. So they wanted to drive profitability, and they knew that to be profitable and to fuel growth and be able to fulfill their vision, they needed to do things better and differentiate what they were doing from everybody else. So Apple started, with the Apple I, which is in many ways was kind of like a commodity product, even though it was a hyper niche product. Well, let's take it into the world of small businesses. So let's look at it from the perspective of being in the coffee business. So a commodity is coffee beans, right? Well, they're not usable until you've done something with them, if you turn it into a good. So if you're doing this at home, you might be picking your own coffee beans, harvesting them, drying them, and then grinding them and making your own coffee. Well, of course, that's impractical because they don't grow here. And of course, nobody's going to want to grow their own coffee beans. So other people said, I'm willing to turn that into a good and package it for other people, deliver it, harvest it, et cetera, et cetera. And then it further evolved into a service where people were willing to brew the coffee for other people. And coffee shops started showing up. And then it moved to the higher level, which we see with Starbucks, where the product is combined with an experience in an environment where you're comfortable enjoying your coffee, having quiet coffee moments, or doing work, or just getting away time from home or work, whatever it might be. So as this evolution happened, we moved from extracting commodities to making goods, to delivering services, to staging experiences. Now, what's happened since this book came out is that more and more businesses have zeroed in on the next step in this evolution, which we call transformations. So the best way to think about it is guidance is being delivered with this. This is what I'm doing right now for all of you. In the case of Starbucks, this would be the barista training that they're delivering. Or if you had purchased the franchise from McDonald's, you'd be spending time going to Mac University in Chicago, where they would train you everything you need to know about operating a very successful McDonald's restaurant. Okay, so let's revisit again. Why are we here? To think differently and get better results, right? And if we execute this properly, it should help us enjoy life more. So to get there, we want to rethink what we do. So let's start at the end. Our goal here is to know the real reason you have customers or clients. So now this is about you. It's about your mindset, your behavior, how you present yourself, how you deliver your products, services, that type of thing. So if you ask yourself, why do you have customers? Is it because of who you are? Is it because of your experience? Perhaps your expertise. It's unusual, it's very specific, it's very relevant. Or is it your key service or product that you deliver? You know, do you have a monopoly for what you do? Or is it based on an association that you're affiliated with? You know, if you're a real estate agent, you're probably affiliated with a larger organization that provides an awful lot of marketing cover for you, but of course, not as much as you would like to see. So there can be many reasons here. So it's important to keep these in mind as we dive into doing your first assignment. So let's get to work here. Is anybody familiar with the pyramid exercise? Some of you might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid, where he's got these multiple levels. It was a model that he developed in the 1940s. He was a psychologist and he wanted to understand the motivations of humans. At the bottom level of his pyramid, it was all about survival. Things, you know, are you safe? Are you getting enough food? That type of thing. And then the next level was about security and safety. You know, did you have a cave to live in or a hut? Was it near water that was accessible? Was there sustainable supply of food and so on? So was there security there? The next level up was about social factors. You know, could you get along with and fit in with your clan or your tribe? And then the next level was, could you get along and achieve something within your clan or a tribe? Could you establish esteem and capabilities? And then the top level was all about self-actualization. Could you put the whole package together and be comfortable and content with where you were in life and achieving happiness? Okay, so this is not about Maslow's pyramid. This is about business, this assignment. So what you see behind this graphic here titled Pyramid Exercise is a real example from a case study that we did for another client. Let me go back to this real quick. So this was work that was done in front of a whiteboard. So we're gonna do a hand version of this, but let me walk you through the process. So our pyramid is based on different levels of what you deliver to customers and the value they get out of it. At the basic level, there are the most functional attributes of what you deliver day in, day out. These are the most tangible things that you do. So these include services, products, you know, the tangible things that you deliver and that they receive and that they take with them or that they're able to use in real time. The next level up in that is what that offers your customers, users, and clients. Now, the way to think about this is to think about brand. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I have a love-hate relationship with this term brand. For so many people, it represents logo or color palette or fonts or combinations of those types of things. I prefer a really simplistic definition of brand, that a brand is simply a set of expectations. That set of expectations lives in the minds of your customers, your clients, your users, your target audiences. You have the ability to manage that brand, but you don't control it because they create the brand as a reflection of how they perceive you, what you do, how you deliver it, all of these other intangible factors. So when I say the brand offers me, you want to think a bit more holistically about it, okay? So then that drives the next level, which is all about the emotional benefits. So if you're still thinking in terms of brand, now you want to think about how that brand makes me feel. If I recite, some well-known brands like Coca-Cola, some visual imagery and some feelings come to mind. If I mention McDonald's, some other ones come to mind. If I mention, Body Works or Starbucks, a whole different set of feelings and imagery and such come to mind. So we want to identify what those are too. Sorry, I keep clicking the wrong button here. The other thing we want to isolate is if this brand was a person, what kind of personality traits and attributes would be associated with this person? How would they behave and be perceived? And then at the conclusion of this, we're trying to boil it all down into what we define as the essence. It's the core of what you are and what your business stands for and does on a regular basis. Okay, so that's kind of the abstract view of it. Now let's make it more tangible. In this case, this was a dental practice. Now this was an interesting dental practice in that they had big ambitions. They didn't just want to be a dental practice. They wanted to eventually practice whole body dental health care. So they were looking way out there on the horizon. So that was their vision. And it's rare that people ever achieve their vision. The vision is always good to keep it way out there on the horizon. And then what you do day in, day out is informed by that vision. I think that's a nice way to keep it in perspective. So what we did was I got in front of a whiteboard, and then I asked people as we moved up this pyramid, we went through each band and I asked them to lay out for me the functional things that they delivered day in, day out that were relevant to their patients for this clinic. So we filled up the board with a whole bunch of words and phrases from some of the leadership of this firm, as well as some of the other people from other departments in a variety of roles. So we worked our way up, and then at the end, we went back and we identified and circled in red those that were the most relevant and valuable they felt to their target audiences. So that became the pyramid that we put together. Then we boiled that down by level to those that we thought were the most relevant, and then we did some modification on them after we had some time to reflect and perfect them. So in their case, the functional attributes boiled down to personalization, whole well-being, dental health specialists, and an educated staff. The rational benefits that fell out of that was, speaking about the patients, the appearance of their mouths, their teeth, that type of thing. It's something that people are very sensitive to. There was also oral health that was a rational benefit, being well cared for, and then driven by convenience and simplicity, the fact that they offered a one-stop practice was also perceived as a very powerful benefit. So the emotional benefits that resulted from this was that the practice was that much more trusting. It was associated with a higher level of comfort dealing with them compared to other experiences with dental practices and dental care in the past. And one thing that was a bit of a surprise to me was this notion of connection or being connected. It was partially driven by the fact that everything was happening in one practice, one stop, and you could get things done in one day that would previously required multiple visits to the practice. But they were technology driven, so all of your records and files and preferences were available and accessible online. So that was what Connected was about. And then in terms of personality, the associations there were based on confidence, being smart, but also being accountable, always keeping the patient informed of what the expectations would be. And if something didn't go according to plan, owning it immediately and correcting it. Ultimately, they boiled all of this down to the essence being defined as hyper-personal dental health. Okay? So this is fine for internal communication, but you're not going to go out to your target audiences and your customers and clients and use this language, right? So here's how we put it to work. We developed what I call a message platform. And where before building the pyramid, we started at the bottom, in putting the message platform together, we start at the top. So the vision we defined here and we articulated as whole body wellness. The promise was personal and complete dental health. And the hook, which we were going to use as a tagline and in lots of communications, was dental care the way you want it. We defined the benefit claims that supported the hook and the promise. Number one was patient-tailored dental treatment, and the proof points were personalized treatment and plans, the database with rich patient history and staff comprehensively trained in your preferences. Number two, complete dental wellness with the one-stop for family, cosmetic, restorative care, etc., as well as state-of-the-art treatments and such, laser technology, a lot of those capabilities and technologies. And lastly, superior dentists and remarkable staff. They invested an enormous amount of time and money in educating their staff and improving them. Okay. So that's what we will want to develop. So your assignment for the next week is to take the document that I emailed to all of you. If you didn't receive it this morning, please shoot me an email at rob@Addwater, and I'll make sure I send it to you. So your job is to complete that document and then scan it or take pictures with your smartphone, and you can text them to me or email them to me. Then I will go through them and provide you feedback on them so that you'll be prepared to take your thinking to the next level as we approach next week's assignment. Also, I want to mention that on Thursday, I'm going to make a window available for anybody who wants to join for a Q&A call. It'll be live. We'll do it with Zoom video conference, so we can share screens and other people can listen to each other's questions and answers. There's a wonderful sharing experience that goes on when we've done this type of thing in the past. Now, if you have some questions or some things you want to explore individually or privately, just shoot me an email and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. Okay? So then the conclusion of that, we will be filling out these sheets. So I actually did it myself just to make sure you could see how it works. And this is the final pyramid that I put together. So hopefully that'll provide a little help. And then here's some inspiration that I thought just might loosen your minds a bit. So when E-Trade launched, of course, they were all about enabling you to do online trading and saving a ton of money, even over Charles Schwab, in doing it. But their advertising was very Apple-like when they launched. They weren't focusing on the features and the specific benefits. No, they were being more subliminal and using some humor to get you to consider and E-Trade for your trading solution. So I love this ad here. The dumbest guy in high school just got a boat. Here's a perfect example for a dental practice, you know, super, super simple. Clean teeth, best price, amazing office. You know, how can you make it simpler than that, right? And then here's another one that made me chuckle when I first saw this from IKEA, when they were introducing lighting that also had additional features for their technology-oriented customers. And I just love the play off of Apple here. So hopefully you find that helpful. I encourage you to dive into your assignments today, get started, try to carve out some time, and try to do all the pages except for the page 6 in one sitting, then put it away for a day or two. And while you're driving, you've got time in the shower, you're walking the dog, you'll have some additional thoughts you can come back to and add to each of the pages. Then you'll be prepared to complete the triangle on the last page and send it to me. So that concludes our lesson for today, and I'll look forward to seeing your responses and our next session online. Thank you.